Antonia Dolhaine, a Somatic Depth Coach, joins Mystical Sisterhood today. Our conversation is broad yet deep. Antonia shares with us her background as a Cirque du Soleil acrobat whose work changed as the pandemic began. Following an intuitive hit to begin a business, she began offering breathwork and eventually coaching sessions to her clients. We explore how we can work with our symptoms to bring about wholeness versus pushing them away, how to work with dreams to heal our nervous systems, what is grounded spirituality, and how to transform burnout into healthy energy preservation. Thank you to Antonia for being here, and let's get started. Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I'm here with Antonia Dolhaine. And Antonia and I just met in a virtual room only a few weeks ago by our connection, Dara Brustein, who just happened to be on the podcast maybe 3 short weeks ago. So, Antonia, I'll just say, by way of introducing you briefly to the audience, that day when you shared, we kind of went around the room to share who we were and why we were there. You shared that you hailed from Canada and that you are a somatic depth coach. And right away, my ear tuned into that. And I thought, like, oh, I'm going to lean in and see what's here for me. And you had shared that day that you had worked with senior level creatives in the entertainment field. I believe had a background in Cirque du Soleil yourself, and just a myriad of qualities and experiences that you'd had that are culminated in the you here now and what you're here to offer. So I really wanted your voice to come and share the deep wisdom and just the cultivation of everything that's really ensued before this time to create your offerings and just your being here. So first of all, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. That was a great intro.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it when podcast hosts make me sound cool.
Hey, no problem. No, but I just felt that you gave me some topics to, okay, we can talk about these things today. So there were so many good ones. But yeah, just beginning with you and your life, I always like to ask, here you are today where you find yourself. Did you have any of these passions or any clues when you were a child that this kind of giftedness or healing or anything, did it speak to you as a kid that you remember?
No. Yeah. I mean, it was even a surprise. It was a surprise to me that I ended up doing this and finding so much fulfillment. Like I started
Mm,
this business as well, I guess I'll kind of just do this kind of pandemic project when all of the shows were closing. I was working as a professional acrobat for many years, most of those years being with Cirque du Soleil. And where
mm.
shall I start?
Well, the maybe not a knowing when you were a child, but just knowing that you were an acrobat,
Mhm.
that you were using your body for movement, for self-expression from, I'm guessing, a young age.
Definitely that. Yeah. I was a very hyperactive, very shy, very like internally kind of exploring child, but I had a lot of energy and we moved around a lot growing up, but like I'm having distinct memories now of this log house that we lived in on Bone Island, which is just like a 20-minute ferry ride off the coast of Vancouver. And in this log house, I mean, the walls were made of logs, so it was kind of just like a jungle gym of a house where I would literally climb the and just like launch myself onto the couch. Probably didn't help that my parents fed me candy. Just didn't, yeah, they like, I think really wanted a kid, but just did not know how to parent at all. So I just got like candy breakfasts a lot and had to work out that energy somehow. So as far as like the skill or the orientation that I work in now, like looking back, I can kind of go, oh, okay, I grew up with a lot, like in a very traumatic household, and my parents lacked a lot of emotional maturity and many other things. So I had to kind of show up as an adult at a young age and really attune to the threats in my environment. And that survival skill, which is obviously something I had to transmute through a lot of therapy
Mhm.
and personal work over a decade. And, it's work that I continue to do. I do think I have managed to successfully transform into something that's not just helpful for my survival, but actually useful to other people's thriving
Mhm.
as well. Like the ability to tune to threats in my environment, I have turned into the ability to deeply attune to
Wow.
what's moving in my client systems.
Mm-hmm.
not from a place of survival, but from a place of curiosity and openness
Mm-hmm.
and relaxation and love.
Because all of that, the past experiences and the nervous system igniting and how the environment can bring forth that energy within us. It's here with information and it's always speaking to us, right?
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that attunement then. Well, first of all, in podcasts around conscious parenting, I have a background in that. We've talked a lot about attunement to your children. And it's such a beautiful word because I mean, what is that word attunement when you think of it, what does it mean to you?
A connection, a sufficiently strong connection with your own senses that you can be in the world without shutting down or dissociating from it. It's a presence with what is,
Mm,
essentially.
mhm. And that feels like a being in the body
Mm.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to attune to other people if you're not
Yeah.
connected to your body in some way.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that during the pandemic or thereabouts, when your work shifted, that there was something new calling you. What came to you and what did you start to consider possibly seems like supporting other people with?
It's been such a journey. I'll try and summarize it in bullet points, I guess. But yeah, I had had an injury a couple weeks before the pandemic shut the world down. So I'd left my job already to come home and recover. And I had already, for the last, I would say, 18 months of my time as a professional acrobat, I was already looking to turn to something else. And for quite a chunk of time, I thought that thing was industrial design. I
Mm,
thought I wanted to work in future textiles. I just thought it was cool. And I even applied to some pretty big design schools, one of which was in London, Central St. Martin's, and had gotten into the three-dimensional design and architecture foundation there. And didn't end up going because I got this cruise ship contract, which was my last contract before leaving the industry. And thank goodness in the end, because thinking back now, I'm like, in order to actually get into the work of future textile design would have required me to go through like 6 to 8 years of designing toilet
mm,
seats and like scissor handles,
right.
a lot of that stuff. And looking back now, the idea of working in future textiles was much more interesting than the actual reality of what it took to get there. So yeah, I was kind of looking for something of what is something where I can tolerate the long, long process that it takes to get really excellent at it and actually enjoy that enough to show up to it every day. I think it might have been maybe early June 2020. So a couple months into the pandemic, I was lying on my balcony and I don't know, I just really felt like I got smacked in the face by this idea of like, I'm going to start a business. I don't know what. I'm just going to make a website to see what happens. And I had been experimenting with breath work at that time. And one of the retreats that I was attending also offered an option to continue and certify. I would no longer recommend that training to anyone, but I did it. I did it. I went all the way through. I did all the levels consecutively, which is also something I wouldn't recommend to most people. It's like do one level at a time, like
Mm,
integrate one at a time,
mhm,
But I was just like, whatever. I'm bored. It's the pandemic. There's nothing else to do, so I did that. And I've always been someone who like goes quite gung ho with things. So in order to certify completely, I had to do a practicum. And yeah, like had people coming and just like lying on the balcony to do breath work like every single day, almost 4 to 5 people, or I was like taking the bus to go to theirs and facilitate these breath work sessions in as COVID safe a way as possible. So
mm,
I did a lot of online as well. And yeah, by the time I got my certification, I was like, well, the entertainment industry still hasn't reopened, so I guess I'll just do this. And while I was facilitating these sessions, I was getting really great feedback about the breath work, but the best feedback I was getting was almost everyone, like pretty universally, was going, listen, the breath work's great. I love the breath work, but what I'm really living for is like the intention setting conversations we're having beforehand and the
mhm,
integration conversations we're having afterwards. And I find that each time I just want to keep talking to you more. And I sort of almost feel sad when we go into the into the breath work and would you consider coaching me? And yeah, to me at the time, I hadn't really thought about coaching. Also because I'd, been a bit of a hot mess myself up until that point. I was just like, you want me to coach you? All right, like at your own peril, So what I ended up doing was just communicating that, like saying, hey, I'm not necessarily a wizened human here, and but I'm glad you're enjoying the conversations. If you want to do this, I'm going to charge you like $12 a
yeah.
session.
Right.
And we're gonna sign a thing that says like Antonia is not responsible for my mental health and well-being. We're basically just having conversations. And yeah, I ended up being really surprised at how much I enjoyed it and how much other people seem to be getting from it. And I thought, okay, well, again, it's the pandemic. There's nothing else to do. I've been laid off from all my jobs. So let's just keep going. So I recognized that probably wouldn't have been the best thing to just keep going without training. So I signed up for the 6 month long coach training and did that and hired a supervisor, which is not a normal thing in the coaching industry to hire a supervisor. But I was like, therapists have supervisors.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't a coach have a supervisor? And
Mhm.
that ended up being such a good decision. Like it
Mm.
really accelerated my learning and my deepening of the craft early on, such that I think it's been possible to accomplish in a short time with my business, what usually takes quite a bit longer. And yeah, I was off. That was basically it. I went back to university, started a psychology degree as well, have been studying that concurrently with running my business, and I've been doing it full time since I started.
I love it how your people who you were facilitating the breath work with, they're telling you, no, this is what we want and need. And it's just so beautiful because it's that human connection piece. It's that, especially during that time of isolation, yet always,
Mhm.
people are seeking this connection. So thank you for that background. It's stunning. And the universe, you had so many options in going to this program, yet when things shift and change or you open a door another way. I was just telling my older son that when we communicate that okay, I'm willing to look there, I'm willing to open that door, it will come. And that thanks for being vulnerable about so many things, right? About the readiness, about how you felt about yourself. But kind of getting into more of that somatic piece. We'll talk about a few different things, but when you offered to me, okay, Maureen, here's some avenues we can go. I'm like, oh, okay, these are awesome guides for me because I feel like the work you're offering is different or different framework or perspectives than I always hear. So you had offered how we can collaborate with our symptoms or what our body is speaking to us to become whole. So is that kind of like a cornerstone of the work you do?
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say the main thing that people come to me with is like, well, usually, and this is a thing that I've discovered over my more than 4 years now of coaching experience, is that people are really bad at knowing what their actual problem is.
Hmm.
They'll come in with, I don't want to say a set of symptoms, but just like a set of struggles. And they're like, I need to fix this, and I'm bad, and I can't believe I'm struggling. I'm too smart to struggle with these things. And
Hmm.
yet here we are. I need you to discipline me. This is usually the kind of energy that people come in with. But I mean, to use the example that I used at the beginning of this call of I had severe complex PTSD and hypervigilance was part of that, the attuning to my environment from a place of fear.
Hmm.
And for a long time in my recovery, I thought that I had to get rid of my hypervigilance. I had to fix it. But here we are, like my business has literally grown out of the seed of this capacity that I have to attune very, very precisely to my environment. And I couldn't have done that if I just gotten rid of the hypervigilance. I had to transform it into something else. There's this quote by Buckminster Fuller that I love and I return to again and again, which is that like pollution is just resources whose value we haven't recognized yet. And I do
Hmm.
think that we have this attitude towards our psychic worlds a lot of the time of treating aspects of ourself as trash that needs to be thrown out. And it's like, you just haven't recognized the value of that thing that you're trying to get rid of yet. Because once it has the conditions that it needs, these parts of ourselves, they use their capacities to try and keep us alive at whatever cost. And until they recognize that they are safe and that they don't have to do that particular job anymore, they don't have the awareness that there's a different way to use their skill. So I'm
Hmm.
there to help my clients by providing the conditions and helping them provide themselves the conditions of safety that these parts of themselves are seeking so that those parts can take on different, more helpful jobs in service of their thriving. Yeah.
It's a beautiful way because I hear you saying, and I've seen this too, is that even something like I feel overwhelmed or taken over by the thoughts or feelings, and that there is a way to understand them. I feel like so often, and I think you're referring to work that sounds like IFS, the internal family systems and the parts.
Mm.
And I've only learned a little bit about that, and I'm fascinated with it, but whatever way that we're here to understand what's coming up, it's certainly not to get rid of. And that is a beautiful quote because I think that just, I mean, broadly, we look at these things as bad when we're growing up or
Hmm.
shameful. Makes me think of shame when you're talking. And
Hmm.
so I hear you saying, like, I reorient the relationship my clients have with what's coming up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And
Yeah.
yes, well spotted with the IFS. I am trained in IFS. I have
Hmm.
my level one IFS certification.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a beautiful modality. It's very process oriented, and there's many other process oriented ways of working that
Mhm.
are central to how I work with clients.
Yeah. So I'm
Mm.
hearing too that just the what you've chosen to study across the years is just I love that piece of it where even for you there are these piecemeal things, the breathworks here, the IFS is here, the different trainings you've had, and then you really bring that together and it's this beautiful combination that's uniquely you because it's also coupled with your unique experiences. So I think that's where I love coaching or anyone that's kind of starting their solopreneur journey of that it all seems like disparate pieces, yet if you give them time, if you give them space, love, and energy, they're going to come together at some point. And sometimes it's a process of patience we need and
Hmm.
just realizing that it's a process.
Absolutely. Yeah. The image that comes to mind is there's a fermentation scientist who I follow on Instagram who posted this video of like a time lapse of a petri dish and this like single bacterial organism being dropped in this dish and just how it like expands and expands and expands over time. And I think it's the same. Like we are systems.
Mhm.
Nature is a system. It's a beautifully designed and efficient system. What any of these modalities ideally is helping us do is to access that natural wisdom, to reconnect to that natural wisdom within
Beautiful.
ourselves, because we're naturally efficient if we let ourselves be.
So again, attunement, and I want to ask you another question about the dreams and healing your nervous system, but just leading to that question of is nature a big part of what you advocate and what you turn to? Because when we did our grounding before we hit record, you talked about being rooted to Mother Earth. And so can you tell me what that means to you and how that can help or support a client or anyone listening today?
Yeah, nature is a huge part of my work. And I mean, it took me a couple of years to realize why that it wasn't just like, oh, my work is nature themed. It's like we are nature. We come from Earth. Our bodies are made out of the same things that Earth is. We were born out of this massive cosmic explosion that's still a bit mysterious. And it sounds so trite to say, but like we are stardust and all of the same laws that govern the natural universe govern us. So it behooves us to really look at
Mhm.
how those fundamental patterns of nature and the universe, spirals, fractals, symmetries, waves play out in our systems. And if we're ignorant to that, doesn't matter what modality you're applying it, you're just going to be
Mhm.
applying it inefficiently. So yes, it's a huge piece of the work that I do. And I am of the belief that one's relationship to nature is reflected in their relationship
Mhm.
to themselves. Like for a lot of years in my trauma recovery, nature was something I liked the idea of, but when I was actually in nature, I was like, like just it's a little scary, it's a little, and that really mirrored my relationship to being inside my own body.
Mhm.
And of course it did, how could it have been any different? Because it's the same thing.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
have this idea that my body's here and it's my arms and it's my legs, but when you actually break it down and you look at these communities of organisms that live inside our guts and on our skin, it's just like, well, actually, where do I end? And
Mm.
coming back to that again and again, anytime I get stuck in session, I'm often planting my feet in the floor and being like, okay, well, there's some very, very freaking old mushrooms
Mhm.
that live in the soil underneath me, and they probably have a better answer than I do. So I'm just going to let them tell me what to do next. You know?
Yeah. It's a real, do you sense even from the time that you began in this part of your life and your work that there's changes occurring where I know that the field, there's more information for the traveler or the listener who is interested in these sorts of messages. But it feels now to me, even in the last few weeks to months, that maybe it's just me, but I have to feel that it's the collective too, is a calling back to the sacred. And I just feel that there's shift in the collective, shift in consciousness that's occurring. How are you feeling about that?
I mean, I'm very in this world, so I feel that too. And I recognize that I can be in a bit of a bubble.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll like go out to someone's birthday party who like maybe they have friends who like aren't in this world and I'll say stuff and they just look at me like I'm an alien, you know? And it's just things that I'm used to talking to my clients about all the time, you
Right.
know? So it's difficult to know for sure because
Mm.
I know
Mhm.
I'm in my little universe sometimes with this work. However, I hope so. Like I hope you're right. And even the fact that the sacred could mean something earthbound in Western consciousness, I think is very important because Western spirituality has been very escapist
Mm-hmm.
historically. It's been all
Mm-hmm.
about rejecting the body, rejecting the material. Oh, it's all an illusion. I need to escape to 5D. I'm a star seed. It's not about being here now. It's about being wherever the pain isn't. And so
Okay.
there's this almost
Yeah.
dissociative quality that
Yeah.
we have come from in the West in
Mm-hmm.
our
Yeah.
approach to spirituality. I don't want
Mm.
to discount that. I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a connection to something above, but it has to be rooted in something in the ground. Otherwise, we're
Yeah.
just out of our tree and running loose in the park a
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's
Mm,
important to recognize and just listen to as a perspective. I just love that process of listening and listening
mm.
to and taking what's ours. Tell me about how you work with dreams to heal nervous system dysregulation and
Yeah,
getting into regulation.
totally. I love the dream world. I will add the disclaimer that I'm not trained formally in dream work, so it's not a modality that I mainly use with my clients, but it's a big part of my own personal practice of tracking the images and themes in my dreams. And it was actually Dr. Leslie Ellis, who is a Vancouver and California based oneurologist. So that's a dream scientist. And she's done a lot of work in studying how dream therapy can heal PTSD nightmares. And that's actually how I found out about her work, is because I used to have horrible, horrible PTSD nightmares. Like I just could not sleep and I'd wake up in the middle of the night terrifying my partner. And over just a few sessions with her, we actually managed to resolve them. So her approach has really informed how I work with my own dreams and how I also approach my clients' dreams when they come to me with them. So traditionally, or like in popular consciousness, the way dreams are approached is like there's a theme or there's a symbol or there's an image and we Google it and we're like, what does this image mean? But integrative or like somatic dream work really looks at the state of your nervous system in the dream. Have you ever had one of those dreams where it's like you wanted to run, but you couldn't?
Yeah.
You're like,
Mm.
your
Mhm.
legs are heavy and they won't move. Well, that suggests a freeze response or shutdown response in the nervous system that's
Yeah.
being expressed through the dream. So we can get really curious about what forces are trying to move through the body through examining our dreams, through really looking at the way that we interact with these themes as
Mhm.
we're remembering the dreams,
Mhm.
re-entering the dream in our waking life. And I think that's really important
Yeah.
because you can, like, as you're reliving the dream in waking life, say, like, for example, I'll like write my dreams down in the morning, and then when I want to work with them, I'll re-enter them, and sometimes I'll re-enter them from a different perspective, from the perspective of
Okay.
the mirror on the wall, or from the perspective of a different character that I've interacted with, and just tracking what's happening in my nervous system at the same time. It's usually the nervous system trying to find some sort of resolution. And if we're getting stuck in freeze or we're in, flight, we're literally flying in our dreams,
Yeah. Yeah.
it can be a
It's
really useful
fascinating.
tool.
Wow. Hmm.
Hmm.
That sounds incredibly powerful. And I think, like so many things, often people think that if they've experienced something for a long time, that this pattern can't be broken or transmuted, changed. And I love that because I have not heard of entering the dream like that. Would you say anything? I had a dream work specialist on just a couple months ago, but I know it's a question that comes up for people, just even remembering your dreams. You just mentioned writing in the morning. Are you
Hmm.
slow to wake up too? Do you give yourself time so you can, because what I find myself doing a lot is like, I just want to catch that dream. But if I've gotten up to do the first things of the day, like the very first, like going to the bathroom or brushing your teeth, it's already gone. So what can you suggest there?
Well, I have a pretty established morning pages practice at this point,
Mm,
and I just throw it into my morning pages. I'll usually put like morning pages, the date, and then if I'm about to
yeah.
describe a dream, I just put dream at the beginning, like as
Yeah.
a header, and then just blah, 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 like whatever I remember. I think people can get stuck in this place where they think that they have to remember the entire dream in order for it to be useful, but that's actually not usually the case. It can be a
Okay.
single image that you start with and go, okay, I remember there was something about a monkey's head.
Yeah.
And you write down monkey's head. But if you get into that practice of just writing down whatever it is you do remember, more and more will come. And also your dreams will get a lot, like they'll develop a lot more depth and
Yeah.
detail. And
Okay.
I have noticed that different art that I'm consuming will really influence what shows up. And not even in the sense of like my brain's just processing the art or like throwing in those themes haphazardly, but it'll really those images will enter the recurring themes in my dream and expand them and give me more to work with. So
Okay.
it's a really useful avenue. It's like we're in night school every single night. We're getting
Yeah.
free information. And I
Yeah.
definitely go through periods where I don't pay as much attention to my dreams because it can be exhausting. You're like
Yeah.
in human school during the day and in night school during the night. And sometimes you're just like, woof, like I just need a break from school, man. Like I just need to,
Right.
yeah. I'm kind of in one of those periods now, but it can really accelerate a process to pay attention to that
Wow.
moment.
That's helpful. I will tell you, I think I'm on 3.5 weeks of morning pages. So I had just mentioned it in a solo, and what Antonia is talking about is the Julia Cameron, The Artist Way, and morning pages for those of you listening to this and you're not rooted in that. I had heard about it so many times that it was just perfect. And a member of my circle that I'm close with had started. So I began, and there's something very magnetic, I feel like, about morning pages. And I bought the one that was I just got it from Amazon, but it is hardy. I mean, there are the to fill out, and I've just started at 3.5, giving myself a little room where every single line does not have to be filled. I can skip a space or I can be artistic in it, but
Mm,
I found it a process that really draws me in.
hmm.
And I'm just beginning, right? And so it's 12 weeks when you first start, but you just mentioned that you've made it part of your practice. So
Yeah,
have you done it for quite some time now?
I want to say about almost 2 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And at the beginning, I really did think I had to keep like this detailed log of, oh, if anyone digs this up after I die, it has to look impressive. And I've just totally given that up.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like bleeding off into different lines. It's like, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, or like I won't know what to say for a moment, which used to make me pause and then kind of go off into thought and take me away from the practice. But now if I don't know what to say, I just go blah, for as many lines as it takes to come up with another thought. And it can, yeah, I'm really my most boring basic peasant self in
Mhm.
these pages. And I think it's
Mhm.
really important to have a space to have that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And do you feel that the process of just allowing it to flow is enough? And then, you put it to the side and you're like, okay, bless it. Don't need to look at that necessarily again for, I mean, ever. I mean, or do you use it as a reference?
Yeah, I mean, Julia Cameron encourages you to go back through your pages and highlight important stuff. And like, man, if you're hardcore and you can do that, that's amazing. But like,
Right.
and even in the artist way, like filling out all the questions, I did that the first time around. I don't do that. I don't
Mhm.
like, I was like gonna redo it, and I was just like, no, I'm just gonna stick with my pages. Like this is good
Yeah.
enough. If I just
Yeah.
need to get it out somewhere, because if I don't get it out somewhere, it's just gonna come out in a client session or
Oh,
like
that's
at the
good.
grocery store, and while I'm
Yeah.
trying to pay for it. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
there, and if you don't get it out, then it comes out somewhere really awkward and embarrassing,
Yeah. Yeah.
usually. Yeah.
I love it. I'm just really doing the morning pages as well. At the
Mm.
moment, that's what my bandwidth is, and that's a big bandwidth. So
Mm.
if we kind of moved, you alluded to spirituality and how spirituality's been in the West, but you talk about grounded spirituality. So could you say, let's just talk about that a little bit more, because I think perspectives on spirituality, even that word it can mean different things to a lot of different people, but when you use
Absolutely,
it,
yeah.
what does it mean to you and what have you come to know about it?
Okay. So I'm going to preface this with like, there's this quote that a fellow coach of mine shared that was actually shared by a teacher of hers. So we're getting this like third hand. So I'm paraphrasing, but it's
Mhm.
basically that all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And that's
Mm,
kind of been my approach to spirituality. I am very
mm.
anti-dogma. Like I will be dogmatic about like how undogmatic I am about these things. And my aversion to strict rules and
Yeah.
interpretations
Mhm,
definitely comes from my childhood. My
mhm,
mother bought a copy of A Course in Miracles at Costco in my early childhood, and our entire life was just frankly like destroyed
yeah.
by her obsession with it that has been ongoing. Like I was bounced from cult to cult growing up. And so I have a lot of baggage
Mhm,
around escapist, disembodied new age spirituality mainly,
mhm,
and just the bypassing there. So it took me a really long time to come to any place of not rejecting spirituality altogether, even as I was an extremely spiritually lost and curious child. Like at 15, I invited this rabbi to this coffee shop in a mall because I had questions, you know, and I'm not Jewish. So like I was raised kind of new agey Christian hodgepodge. Like we skipped from thing to thing, but I was just like, okay, I need you to tell me if Judaism is for me, you know, and then I went to a mosque. I was like, I need to know if Islam's for me. And I was just trying to
Wow.
find anything. So yeah. And then for a long time, I was just like, hey, fuck all of this. But it was actually psychedelic psychotherapy that brought me back to to a very reluctant and skeptical curiosity
Mhm.
about all of this. And where I have kind of come to is a very grounded, yes, eco-feminist, but also just like I just see so little distinction anymore between mathematics and ecology and spiritual, like they just, and design and philosophy
Mhm.
and aesthetics. I'm like, it's the same. I know it's very non-academic for me to say it's the same thing, but like it is of the same essence and it's the same prism. It's just how you turn it. And
Mm.
every way of turning the prism has given me something at some point.
Yeah.
And globally we're still trying to impale people with the prism and yeah, there's beauty in every perspective, but mine I guess appeals to people who are spiritually curious but skeptical because it is very rooted in like yeah
I
I
love that. Yeah. It's powerful for me to even be in that conversation because of the nature of the podcast
mhm,
and bringing in, because I think some words are these big blanket words too. And I heard it said just yesterday that it is the not striving for, but the becoming of our most authentic selves and in the process of life. And that is said and I think that there can be overlays of what spirituality is, and you need to be spiritual and all these different angles that, yeah. So it's like I'm taking it in as I go along.
mhm,
I always love that permission to kind of like reorient to something and then not with this necessarily to begin again, but just be willing to see with new eyes and be willing to see with ways we saw before that it's your growth, it's the transformation, and it's going to look different for each of us. So, yeah, thanks for
absolutely
sharing. That's good.
yeah
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So, as we kind of are getting towards the tail end of our conversation today, Antonia, I wanted to talk about you had mentioned this idea of burnout. And it kind of I'm thinking about what you said about the breathwork classes and just going,
mhm.
going, going. But I think burnout in a lot of different ways affects many of us. And you can let us know like how much you see that in yourself or your clients. But you mentioned getting out of energetic debt and healing the patterns bankrupting you. So if we just kind of
Mhm.
open up this part of the conversation for anyone who might be listening who is experiencing any form of burnout in their life.
Yeah. Okay, there's so many different directions I could go with this, but I will bring it back to those fundamental patterns of nature, which
Hmm.
are the most efficient patterns, the spirals, the fractals, the symmetries, the waves. Industrialized culture doesn't recognize, is not designed around those patterns. It does not encourage us to harmonize with them. And that the inefficiency caused by departing from those patterns uses more energy than we have. And if we are constantly spending more energy than we are replenishing, it's very, burnout's not that mysterious. You know, it's like you have a credit card, you have a certain limit on your credit card, depending on what capacities you were born with. And, you know, there's individual variation there, but depending on how much you had to survive in your childhood, that's expensive, you know,
Hmm.
depending on the resources that were the financial, emotional, psychological, spiritual resources that were available to you in the context that you had to survive, that adds, you know, makes deposits. A lot of us grew up with the message that it was not okay to be seen doing nothing, and that being seen doing nothing would earn us the judgment of being lazy or unproductive or like fundamentally unserious.
Hmm.
And so, you know,
Yeah.
we have a lot of us have this are living with this message in our nervous system that as soon as we have energy, we have to spend it. And it almost doesn't matter how, we just have to spend it or to be seen doing something so that we don't get rejected from the
Yeah.
tribe,
Yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
what ends up happening is we, instead of living in a wave pattern, which is like You have productive weeks, you have less productive weeks, you have productive weeks, less productive weeks. You're nourishing yourself in between, you're putting energetic deposits in the bank. So sometimes you have more, sometimes you have a little less, depending on what you're spending. We are collectively stuck in a pattern of basically blowing our whole paycheck as soon as we, like on payday, like
Mhm.
we get a deposit and we're like, great, now I can do this like 30, I can run down my 30 item to-do list and do everything at once. And then I'm just lying in bed feeling like so depleted, like the calcium is being sucked from my bones. And how did this happen? Yeah, but it's just like, well, that's how it happens. And it doesn't
Mhm.
help that I'm not fundamentally anti-capitalist. I think it's a system and it can be used and abused. And we have come to this place where we live in a very fractured culture, very
Mhm.
fractured individualist culture, and we are expected to connect to resources separately that would normally be woven into a well-designed society. And they are commodified resources that would normally be woven into this society. So it requires a lot of financial resource, and a lot of us can burn out just trying to generate the financial resources to access the care services
Yeah.
that would allow us to balance our budgets. So there's a personal element to this. There's obviously a systemic element to this. It can't be, just shoved down to like, you need to change your mindset. It's
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of layers, and we have to look at the soil, we have to look at the roots, and we have to look at the leaves.
Mhm.
So I teach my clients to do the best they can with what they have. Well, first of all, unshame the fact that they are living in the red, that they were taught from an early age, most of the time, most of them, that their worth lay in their productivity. I feel like this is almost
Mhm.
like a cliche at this point, but like so
Mhm.
many people have that message
Yeah.
living in their nervous system.
Mhm.
And the way that they are living out that message got them to a certain point, but they hit a wall. It's like if they had X amount of room before they hit their credit limit, like using that survival based drive to achieve a certain level of success may have gotten them there. It certainly got me to the place
Mhm.
that I got to. I was very much operating on survival energy all the way through my 20-year training period to get
Wow.
to Cirque du Soleil. And once I
Mhm.
got there, it was just like everything came crashing down on me because there was nowhere else to run. Like I'd gotten to the top of the mountain and I was like,
Mhm.
so where do I run now? Do I run off the edge? Like just
Mhm.
and that is kind of what happened. Like I crashed. I was in bed for like 2 years
Yeah.
consecutively, almost unable to move. So yeah, a lot of things have to be taken into consideration. It's basically just energy math.
Yeah. That's going to resonate with so many. And yeah, and me too. Thanks for sharing that. So just so we can give a snapshot too, in a brief manner, but the work that you do with the souls who come to you, what does it look like? Is it because somatics, and when we even use the word somatic, it's not familiar. And so you know that such a large percentage of society has not experienced it. So is it
Mhm.
I'm sensing that it's a beautiful blend. And is it a combination of being in the body and then also conversing and being in communication about the experience?
Yes. It often starts with way more communication than being in the body because most of my clients do not feel safe in their bodies when they come to me.
Mhm.
And trying to, I think there's this misconception in the sort of pop somatic world on Instagram that being in is better. And it's like, it's not better if you don't have a capacity to be in and you're just immediately going to be ejected out. We cannot force you back into your body. That is not what we're trying to do. So it involves a lot of capacity building, trust building
Yeah.
between me and the client, trust building between the client and each part of themselves that is trying to
Mhm.
eject them or that is living with pains that are buried inside their bodies that they don't have the capacity to hold the fullness of.
Yeah.
And to the point of patterns in the universe and spirals, like if you want to stop going in circles, you have to start moving in spirals. And the difference between a circle and a spiral is the gained capacity that you have between those rungs. And
Mhm.
so that's what I'm trying to do with my clients is we move in and then we move out and then we move in and we move out. Every time we move in, we build a little bit more strength and that allows them to move out of that circle and come just a little bit higher so that we can start building that upward spiral. And it really depends on the client and what their goals are.
Thank you for doing this work. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
I love
Great
it.
questions and great
Yeah.
conversation.
Is there anything, as we kind of close out, anything that's coming to mind that you'd like to share with the audience before we share where to find you, but just any general message that is coming to you, or a piece that we left out, or
Yeah, you are the successful product of an unimaginable amount of evolutionary processes
mm,
and survival decisions. Like
mm,
your system is intelligent. The shame creates this narrative that we're broken, but it's just like you may feel like you're in a lot of pain right now, or like you're
mhm,
not where you want to be in your life. But the fact that you are alive right now, like the number of things that your human and animal and bacterial ancestors and rock and
mhm.
iron ore ancestors had to survive in order for you to get where you are is like you are an evolutionary triumph, and everything that you and your ancestors had to do to survive to get to this point means that where you are is perfect. And the healing can start before people believe that, and it can't go anywhere without at least one of the people in the partnership having at least a baseline of understanding that that is the case, that there's nothing wrong that needs to be fixed. It's really just allowing the system to continue to dialogue with itself in a way that supports it to keep
Oh,
making those decisions. So it's like you are such a exquisitely intelligent system because nature is the ultimate designer and you are nature. That is the message, the wordy message. I feel like it's just like a wordier version of like you have all the answers.
yeah.
But truly, yeah.
Well, and everything you've offered today is just a really unique, I just love the way that it's coming together, in the
Mm,
way that you're pulling together a lot of resources and knowings that you have into what you are here to do for with humanity. So thank you for being here. And do you want to share an Instagram, if you do social media, or a website before we log off?
yes. So I'm intermittently on Instagram. I prefer to hang out on Substack. I have a Substack called Space Unknown, and it's newer, but it's going really well. It's thriving, and I publish weekly articles, and I actually have a workshop coming up on burnout prevention where we'll explore more of what I was talking about on this podcast. And if you catch this podcast too late for that workshop, it'll also be recorded. Um, and I am on Instagram as Antonia Dolhaine, and my website is also the same name, just antoniadolhaine.com.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, thank
easy.
you for being here. And as always, thank you to the listener. I hope you enjoyed today. Share widely with friends and family, anyone who you feel would benefit. And
Mm.
Antonia, we will see you around.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you are welcome. All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.